All right, so I found a spot in the shade here. It's beautiful, beautiful summer day in Texas, and it's a little hot if I'm not in the shade. So I found a spot in the shade here, but it's not what I'm here to talk about. I want to talk about signs of an attack, signs of a disaster, signs. How do you know? How do you know something happened? And I was driving to work a couple weeks ago, and the radio just stopped playing. I'm old school. I listen to the FM radio in the truck, and it just stopped, and no big deal, right? Nothing happened, nothing was going on, but I'm thinking that's kind of interesting. Like, does that mean anything? Is that a sign? Should I be keying off of that saying, wow, hey, the radio just stopped broadcasting? Must be World War III, must be end of the world. So I thought I'd go through, did a little research, kind of looked up a few different common things that might have a disruption and what it could mean, right? And thought that would be kind of fun. Let's do a video on it, let's talk about it, maybe build some awareness. So if one of these things happens, you can say, hey, wait a minute, this might mean something. And the radio going out did not mean anything, but I did some research on it, and we'll kind of go through it, what it could mean, what could cause your radio to stop. But same thing with the cell phone. What could cause your cell phone to stop, your car to stop? Talk about some disruptions like cyber attack, or how do you know? How do you know that a nuclear bomb just went off, which is kind of an interesting topic. Obviously, you might see the big mushroom cloud, but that can't be it. Can't be the only thing. What if you're too far away? What if there's something in the way? Trees, a mountain. You don't see the mushroom cloud. They're pretty big. So we'll talk through that, right? Thought it would be an interesting thought experience, right? Is what are some signs? So with the radio, my old FM radio going in the car, that stopped working. It was for a while, feels like a minute. Couldn't mean anything. Of course, you can always just change channels, jump on a different channel there. So what could cause it? What could cause your radio to stop working? Not just one channel, but multiple channels, but maybe even one channel, certainly one channel. It was probably a technical issue at the radio station. But CME, what about EMP, CME, solar flare? I know we had the big CME solar flare, solar apocalypse that didn't happen too long ago. So I think we're all burnt out on CME. I know I am, but solar flares in general, they can impact the ionosphere, which could disrupt radio traffic. It's probably not the same traffic that you might have on your FM AM radio, but there are disruptions possible. So can an EMP disrupt? Certainly, right? If an EMP hits and the grid's down, which radio stations generally have backup generators, but you could have damage to equipment, you could have damage to your radio. So EMP could theoretically, all depending on situations and the equipment and shielding type of equipment, certainly an EMP could cause a radio disruption. That's kind of a big deal, and there'd be a lot of other signs, and we'll kind of lean into that a little bit later on. Can grid down stop my radio? As I mentioned, radio stations generally have backup generators. I'm in my car. The car is running, so I've got electricity going to the battery. Electricity going to the radio, and the radio stations have the backup. So it's unlikely that if there was a grid down, whether it's mechanical failure or something else, probably wouldn't affect my radio. So the radio just stopped working, probably not a grid down. There's natural disasters. We don't talk about those a lot, but they happen: earthquake, fire, tornado, even something like terrorism. Certainly that could affect the radio. If something happened at the transmission antenna, at the station, if there was an earthquake, a fire, something like that, even a mechanical failure, right? Those could impact your radio. Wouldn't necessarily be an SHTF post-apocalyptic situation, but certainly that could stop your radio from transmitting. So there's the idea of jamming, like jamming the radio. The Russians are going to jam the radio. That's sort of not a thing, right? It is possible to jam a frequency, and that it requires you're transmitting something else over the frequency. So it wouldn't be quiet. It would be some other kind of noise, random pulse, step tones, warbler, random keyed modulation, tone. So it wouldn't be that it wouldn't work. It's that they're blasting something more powerful on the same frequency, which would prevent my music. Not listen to my music. Now it's all jammed out. It's some weird tone. So Jamming's not going to just stop the radio, but it is a thing, right? Jamming is a thing. The idea of jamming all the radio signals across the U.S. simultaneously is not probably a thing, but if in a situation jammers exist, right, they exist, you can look at the equipment on the internet, it's playing a signal on top of the signal. So you're not just going to like jam the radio interference and you're not getting a signal, and that's more short range. And if you look at the technology behind jamming, you're broadcasting, so you become a target. People can track that back and find where the jammer is. So in terms of the radio not working right, most likely it's a problem at the radio station. It's unlikely to be a sign in and of itself of anything else. But let's keep going. Let's lean into some other things, like my cell phone. As I said, your cell phone stops working. That's actually been happening a lot lately, right? Service disruptions, whether it's at the provider, at the towers, technology, and certainly, as I said, we could say grid down, but most cell towers are going to have some backup power in them, so probably not a grid down if your cell phone stops working. It's more likely some kind of a service disruption. Could be a cyber attack, right? We'll get into cyber attacks. Cyber attacks also create service disruption, but just in and of itself, no cell signal, probably not an indicator of some imminent greater attack, right? Not in and of itself. Probably doesn't mean much other than cell phones are not as reliable as they used to for a lot of reasons, right? So what if your satellite phone stops working? I thought that was interesting. In full disclosure, I've never owned a satellite phone, but I did do a little research. Satellite phones, like cell phones, can also be targets of attack and subject to potential equipment failures, but they can direct detect the satellites, they can affect the infrastructure at the ground level. Generally, they're going to be more reliable, certainly have a larger signal coverage than a cell phone, but they're not completely immune, right? There's still possibility of things could happen to disrupt satellite signals, satellite phones. Once again, in and of itself, probably not some great indicator that some horrible attack's going. If it's part of other things, then sure, maybe. But in and of itself, cell phone stops working, satellite stops working. What if your car stops working, right? And once again, that's more likely to be a mechanical failure. The alternator charges the battery when you're driving. If the alternator fails, it stops charging the battery, power goes out, car's down. But if all the cars on the road stop working at the same time, that's a sign, right? That's an indicator that something bad just happened, likely an EMP. And I know people want to argue all day how much EMPs will impact cars, whether it stops cars. You could turn it off, turn it back on, whatever it is. I'm not going to get into that. That's not the point of this video. But if you're driving down the road and all of a sudden all the cars stop, that's kind of a big deal, right? That's the indicator of there's an attack, whether it's an EMP in and of itself or it's an EMP effect created by a larger nuclear strike, something like that. All the cars stop working. There's some things you can go, and we'll jump into EMP separately, but that's kind of a big deal. That means something bad just happened. Same thing with grid down, like we lose power. You know, it's Texas, it's summertime, wherever you live. Grids are getting more and more impacted. People are plugging more stuff in, so the potential for a grid down is growing, right? They're becoming more common. Once again, in and of itself, grid down isn't necessarily an indicator that we've been attacked. It could be though, right? So once again, we go back to EMP, throwing EMP out. I'm done with CME. Don't want to talk about that anymore ever again. But EMP is a thing. The technology does exist. The weapons do exist. We have enemies in the world that have that technology. So is there a theoretical possibility that we could get hit by an EMP? Yes. If that happened, could it take the grid down? Yes. So grid down, major power outage, could also be a cyber attack, could be a physical attack, right? We've seen in the last few years terrorist attacks on substations. So once again, grid down doesn't necessarily mean EMP. National-wide global grid down, or not global, but national-wide large scale, I'll say the large scale grid down. Now we're like, yeah, that's probably EMP or some type of weapon. But individual areas, localized, odds are it's equipment failure, right? Because that's all we've really ever had, equipment failure, whether that's caused by a terrorist attack or something else. But yeah, large grid down. You should be aware. You should start checking some of the boxes in your mind. As we've said before, if the power goes out, no big deal. But if the power goes out and your phone's dead and your car won't start, that's a bigger deal, right? You should start thinking about some of your emergency plans at that point, right? If something like happens. So I kind of to spin it the other way, so not so much on the signs, like, hey, sign is my phone stops working, what could that mean? Talk about some specific potential events, we could say attacks, events, and some of the signs of that, some of the potential disruptions. So of course cyber's always a big one, near and dear to my heart. Cyber attack, hackers. So I split it into two categories: disruptions and then personal attacks, because you can be attacked personally. It's a thing, it happens all the time. So when we talk about service disruptions, we're seeing it more and more. As we said, multiple cell phone disruptions across the country, 911 disruptions. Is it a failure of the service provider, or was it a cyber attack? And they don't always tell us, right? We don't always know. Maybe it's none of our business. Cyber attacks do happen all the time. Sorry, I got some bugs checking out my legs here. It is a possibility, right? As I said, cyber attacks happen all the time. In fact, there are entire organizations in other countries that all people do is they actually get up, go to work, sit in a cube like an office job, but their job is to hack and phish and try to steal your money, steal your identity. So it is a thing, right? You guys already know it's a thing. It's becoming more and more sophisticated. But service disruptions, always, right? That's your service disruptions. Banking can be impacted by cyber attacks. Point of sale disruptions, right? If you go to Walmart, go to Target, maybe you're a Whole Foods, and that's cool too. If they have a point of sale system that's connected back to a computer network, if there was some kind of an attack, it could affect the point of sale and they may not be able to make the purchase, right? So point of sale disruptions, stock market disruptions, we sort of see some of that kind of lingering right now, some of that out there, potential stock market disruptions based on hackers, cyber attacks. They try pretty hard to make that stuff very secure, but nothing's perfect, right? Airlines, airports, that can happen. I think we've seen that in recent history. Internet service provider outages, internet goes down, could be cyber attack, could be hackers creating disruptions, could be other things as well, just simple equipment failures, cellular outage, infrastructure outages like power grid, water treatment, traffic lights. There's been a lot of talk about that lately, that water treatment systems are actually susceptible to cyber attack, and it had to do with some of the equipment that became very commonly adopted in the industries is actually potentially vulnerable to cyber attack. So that's kind of a thing. Water treatment, as always, you want to keep some water in reserve, keep some water at your house. There's no guarantee that every time you turn on the faucet for the rest of your life, you're going to get fresh, clean water. We all want that. Doesn't hurt to have some gallons in reserve, or more than some gallons, right? So certainly water treatment is possible, traffic lights. So if it's electric, if it's attached to the internet or attached to the computer, it could be a target for cyber attack, for hackers. There was a thing many years ago, didn't look up the date, didn't stick in my head, but Iran had centrifuges not connected to the internet, but still there was a virus written that eventually found its way into the systems, broke the centrifuges. They were never connected to the internet, right? Some of this is very sophisticated in terms of attack surface and nation states trying to get through different attack surfaces. So it is a thing. Once again, personal attacks, that's really where it gets you. Hacking your banking, hacking your IDs, stealing your Facebook account, stolen IDs. They do malware to crypto lock down your computer, ransomware, all that stuff. Those happen. Those are constantly happening, right? Be careful what you click on in terms of links and websites. As I said, there are nefarious criminal organizations where people actually come to work, sit in a cube, and spend all day trying to steal your ID and hack your bank account. That's a thing. Sad reality of the world. They don't do it in the U.S. Probably they do it in countries that care less about that. They aren't as worried about stopping that because they're not attacking their own country. But it's a thing. Unfortunate reality. EMP attack, CME, as I said, CME, I'm not sure. I kind of doubt the Carrington event is what people say it was. Doesn't matter, not important. EMPs are a thing, right? You can still worry about CMEs if you want. If an EMP attack hits, that's a major electromagnetic pulse. Proven, right? I mean, Russia tested, the last major EMP test was Russia, I believe it was the 1960s. And it did what it's going to do. It sends out all that massive electromagnetic pulse that fries electrical components, right? That's not really debatable. That's just what they do. What is debatable is the odds of anything like that ever happening, being used as an offensive weapon. I don't believe they ever have, right? And we could debate that all day. it is a weapon that exists, right? So grid down, yes. Power outage, yes. Cell phone disruptions, yes. Cell phone towers have backup batteries, but EMP damaging electrical components could damage enough components that could stop your cell phone, that could stop your radio, might disrupt your satellite phone, the handheld unit, any ground-based support for the satellites, those kind of things. Radio disruptions, not because it's blocking the radio signal, but if the radio station's blacked out because of an EMP, the equipment's damaged, you're not going to get the signal, they're not going to broadcast. So it's not that it's jamming the signal, it just may, the transmissions may not be happening. So one thing about EMP is I've listed precursor to a nuke attack. So when you look at some of the nuke attack plans, the stuff that's public, I don't have top secret access to anything, and I don't want it. I'm glad I don't. But potential precursor, they say, like if there was incoming nukes, you'd hope, you're going to get the alert on your cell phone because that has actually happened by accident and happens frequently in other countries. Incoming ICBMs take cover or something like that. If you got that right, that's certainly a warning. That's when you know something's about to happen. You may not get that right. It depends on the situation. And some of the attack scenarios, hypothetical attack scenarios, would be EMP first, block everything out, and then start dropping nukes, because that's going to affect communications and response and whatnot. So it is a hypothetical attack scenario. So an EMP hits, grids down, you're like, wow, this really sucks. It could mean that something else worse is about to happen, and in that case you could say EMP might be a sign that, let's take cover for now and wait it out, and take cover for a couple hours before we just start walking home. Whether you're in the car, whether you're there is the possibility that the grid down, the EMP wipe, could mean nukes are inbound, and at that point you're probably not going to get any alerts. So it is something that is kind of a trigger you could play off of if you're devising some response scenarios. It's not a bad idea to think through some responses. What do I do if this happens? What do I do if this happens? Right? And certainly an EMP could be a precursor to a nuke attack. So how do you know? And I had to look this up a little bit, dig around. How do you know a nuke went off, right? I mean, we're miles from any major city. Would I see it? Depends, right? I got a lot of trees out here, so maybe I wouldn't see it. So would you hear it? And the hear it is an interesting part. And there was that movie Leave the World Behind, and there was that high-pitched squeal. I don't know if they were trying to say that was the sound of distant nukes going off. I did do a little research, and they're saying now it's going to sound probably more like a shotgun. They're loud. They're crazy loud. So looking it up, Flexi says the loudest sound ever made by humans was the detonation of the Tsar Bomba, a nuclear bomb created and detonated by the Soviet Union in 1961. It was the most powerful nuclear weapon ever created and tested. The noise created in the explosion likely reached 224 decibels, an extremely large number given the logarithmic nature of decibels. The record for the loudest noise was 200 megaton equivalent. Karatau explosion heard nearly 5,000 kilometers away, and whose low frequency noise circled the Earth 4 times. So the sound wave actually wrapped around the Earth 4 times. Now, that's a low frequency noise that did that, but when you're talking 224 decibels, 200 decibels, it's going to be a loud boom, right? 5,000 kilometers away, it's a loud boom. So if nukes are going off, even if you don't see mushroom clouds, probably going to hear a boom. It's going to be a really loud boom. I don't know that it's going to be a high-pitched squeal like on Leave the World Behind. I don't know what they were trying to do with that. But if you hear the loudest boom you ever heard, that could be a sign. That could be a sign to take cover, right? Stop, drop, and roll. Actually, you'd want to get down, cover your face. I'm joking on the stop, drop, and roll. But you would want to get down. You would want to try to cover your eyes. You'd want to take cover. We've done videos on that. I'm not necessarily going over all of that again right now. Now, the low-frequency noise circling the Earth is interesting, and one of the ways they actually detect nuclear explosions is it's low frequency. We can't hear it, but they have sensitive equipment that can actually hear that low-frequency noise, and since it's traveling around the Earth, if they see that spike in low frequency at that signal, it actually is sort of an indicator that a nuclear weapon went off. So it's one of the ways to detect them. It's not something you and I would key off of. But one thing is the noise, right? Certainly, nuke goes off, it's the sound. Then there's the light. There's the bright flash of light. Obviously, if you're close by, the 20 million tons of TNT equivalent exploding, it's going to be hard to miss. But if you're far away, you know, maybe you don't see the explosion. You'll probably hear the explosion from what we're saying. There's also the light. So 1 megaton explosion can cause flash blindness at a distance as great as 13 miles on a clear day, 53 miles on a clear night. If the intensity is great enough, a permanent renal burn will result. So there's a flash. The flash can go pretty far. So you hear the boom, you see the flash, or it would be the other way around, right? Light travels faster than sound. So you see the flash, you hear the boom. You may get one or the other, you may get both. It's just like a storm, right? You see the lightning, you hear the thunder, one travels faster to you than the other, even though they're both coming from the same spot. So if you see the light, if you hear the boom, that's bad, and you'll know it's going to be the brightest light you've ever seen. It's going to be the loudest boom you've ever heard, likely even if you're far away. So if something like that happens, that's a clear indicator that something really bad just happened, and that's when you can talk about get down, take cover. Once again, just think through those emergency response plans. We all hope the odds of anything like a nuclear war or an EMP strike or anything like that are low and would never happen. Nobody wants that to happen. That's unfortunately not the world we live in. There's some major global conflict going on right now that's creating a lot of uncertainty and saber rattling, in countries that have these horrible weapons are starting to bump heads, which puts us all in the crosshairs, right, of any of this kind of stuff. Whether we're directly involved or not, doesn't matter, right? So something to think about. As always, hope that helps out. Thank you for watching, and we appreciate you.